Hey everyone, it's Perry, also known as Books Aren't Boring, and today I'm coming at you wearing a Harry Potter dress because today we are going to be discussing Pride and Prejudice, which is the last book that I read for school that was required. It was an optional book, so we got to pick if we wanted to read it or not, and I picked it because I've been wanting to read it for a long time. And here we are. I read the whole book for reals, even though I read the entirety of the second half in one night because I didn't do the reading in time, but it's fine. So I'm not really going to be getting into the details of the plot that much, mostly because there's so many characters and plot details. It's better just to, read the book or look it up or something. But I am going to talk a little bit about it and talk about why I think it's a pretty cool book, which a lot of people do because it has movies and stuff. So we already know the basics, kind of. Or you might not, but basically, there are a ton of sisters in the family. There's Jane, Elizabeth, also known as Lizzie. There's Lydia. Basically, the family has a lot of siblings. I don't remember all their names, but the important ones are Jane, Lizzie, and Lydia, and the rest of them are kind of just there because they're part of their family. So the Bingleys are the family that they want Jane to marry into, and she does eventually, and they have a nice relationship. It's not really capitalized upon because it's not the main focus of the book, but they do get together at some point, Mr. Bingley and Jane. Also, side note, my favorite pattern of Jane Austen books is her putting characters named Jane into the book that are just absolutely perfect. So the Bingley and Jane thing actually ties into the main plot. So they send Jane and Elizabeth away to a dance where Mr. Bingley is going to be. And his friend, Mr. Darcy, is the one who everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's so cool. But then Elizabeth's like, you know what, I don't really like this guy. He isn't that great at talking and he's kind of mean to everyone and stuck up. And Mr. Darcy doesn't like Elizabeth either, of course, at first. Then he's like, wait a minute, I do like her. And then the entirety of the rest of the books ensues where he ends up doing all these things that Elizabeth starts getting really conflicted about it, and by the end they end up getting engaged, prepared to marry. I'm not exactly sure. But despite all the fun and cool parts of the Pride and Prejudice universe book, there's also the parts that your teachers will probably want you to talk about in your essays, like classism and sexism. There's not really racism because there's only white people in it. So, but anyway, so the classism is kind of obvious because there's a lot of really rich people and a lot of middle class, lower class people. So I wouldn't say that Elizabeth's family, the Bennets, are low class, but they're also not really high up there, so they don't have a lot to offer in terms of money with relationships, except for when Lydia, one of the younger sisters, runs away with this older guy, Mr. Wickham, because she believes that she's totally in love with him, but Mr. Wickham is completely just a gold digger, and he just took the family's money and went away and doesn't really like Lydia, but Lydia's so in love with him that he can't let her go. But back to the other part about the classism. So Mr. Darcy doesn't really care about classes, but he also does because he believes that he's better than everyone for his class, but he kind of keeps it to himself, and it only comes across as him just being snooty towards everyone who's not an equal to him. We also have Mr. Bingley's sister, I think it is. Miss Bingley is the mean girl, and she doesn't like Elizabeth. She's okay with Jane, but she hates Elizabeth because she thinks that she's encroaching on her space or whatever, because Miss Bingley is trying to impress Mr. Darcy, but Mr. Darcy feels indifferent towards her, and she's just really annoying. She's one of the characters has little redeeming quality about her, so you can kind of just hate her whenever. There's also a lot of insignificant characters that are friends with the main characters, but mainly what you want to focus on is the Bingleys. Darcy, his first name is Fitzwilliam, which is possibly the worst first name I've ever heard, and if you're named that, I'm so sorry. But yeah, and then the Bennets, of course, because there's a million of them. Wickham, there's this other guy who proposes to Lizzie numerous times, despite the fact that she said no. He's really creepy. I don't think he's the same person as Mr. Wickham. His name is Mr. Collins, and he's really creepy. Okay, so there is a little bit of sexism in there, but it's kind of I hate to say it this way, but it's age appropriate, and not age as in like age of the characters. I mean like time period appropriate. Like, of course, there's going to be the whole, like, we need you to marry into a rich man's family thing because all of their kids are women. The most obvious sexism really comes from the other female characters as they look at Elizabeth, because they're kind of like, they don't like her because she's strong. And like the obstinate headstrong girl quote comes from, I believe, like Darcy's aunt or something, when she comes to talk to Elizabeth about Darcy, and she just hates Elizabeth because she actually, I don't know, thinks for herself. But now that we've gotten that business out of the way, let's talk about why it's a cool book, and not just because of the enemies to lovers slow burn 500k word book part. Yes. Number one, Elizabeth is cool. That sounds like literally the stupidest thing I've ever said, but it's a fact that a lot of so first of all, the book itself is a satire on the way that marriage was treated at the time, because it was like, all women want is a husband, all they want is a rich husband. As you know, the first line of the book is just it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Like, duh, that obviously reads as satire. The rest of the book kind of goes between satire and reality, but you can tell that Elizabeth is supposed to be like a commentary on those types of people that are like, all women want is a husband. Elizabeth is cool though, because she's not completely a pushover, as many Jane Austen main characters aren't. They aren't pushovers, they're kind of cool people, but then she gets pushed down a lot by other characters, but is still able to do her own thing. She walks a lot between places. I don't know if people just used to walk a ton or whatever, but there's multiple occasions where she'll be like, yeah, I walked for an hour in the rain puddles, and everyone will be like, are you crazy? She's like, no, that's just me. But she's also she's not the not like other girls stereotype, so it's nice that she's just normal. I don't know. Next we have the Mr. Wickham storyline, which I don't like because of how it ends, but I do think it's interesting that Elizabeth finds him a good person and is still hesitant to believe in him after everything that Mr. Darcy says, because basically, or one of the other men sends a letter to Elizabeth that she reads and is tells her that Mr. Wickham, all he did was beg for money from Mr. Darcy's father, and then when Mr. Darcy's father passed away, then he believed that Darcy himself would be totally cool with him just attaching onto their family fortune kind of. And then when he got rejected, he started spreading rumors about how Mr. Darcy was a bad person, when in fact, even though he's kind of rude, not that great of a person, he is also not a horrible person in the way that Mr. Wickham describes him, if that makes sense. Of course, the end of the book is pretty neat too. It basically alternates between, after Mr. Darcy is I am in love with you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's ugh, how? First off, no. And then she just kind of sits there for a couple days. From what I remember, it's she just sits there in denial for a while, rejected him, even though he's but I spent all my money on you and let you visit my summer home. No. But then eventually she comes around and her family is woo, you get to marry a rich man. And she's this is cool, I guess, and isn't really against it. So maybe the reason I liked it, as opposed to my teacher who said he didn't like it the first time he read it, is because we have read so many angsty teen books that having a book that's literally just about middle-class people trying to engage with rich people and everything going wrong and right at the same time is way more interesting. And I will admit that the only reason I chose Pride and Prejudice is because I knew that Elizabeth and Darcy would get together, but that is different. Don't worry about it, because I did learn a lot from the book. Now, we didn't have to write an essay for this book, because by the time that it was supposed to be time to write an essay for the book, we had already started social distancing and online learning, and my teacher was like, you know what? You won't have to write that stuff. Just work on your AP Lit stuff in general. So we started writing practice essays, and it was horrible. But that means that I don't have any quotes or anything from this book, but I do have like markings, and I don't know what I marked, but I do remember. So like one of the places I bookmarked was just that the younger sisters usually went into town to look at the military guys who walked through the town. And then, okay, so actually in the book, a lot of the times like actual Pride and actual Prejudice will be mentioned, and it's kind of like haha name dropping the book. But Pride is generally associated with Mr. Darcy because he is like, he believes he's above people for having more money, and then that like messes up all of his relationships. A lot of his Pride label is given to him by Wickham, which it says on this page, where he completely manipulates Elizabeth into thinking that Mr. Darcy is the worst person on the planet. Yay. My favorite thing to read involving Pride and Prejudice is something that happens very similarly in the play, the Shakespearean play, Much Ado About Nothing, which involves a lot of Beatrix, and the other guy is Beatrice and Benedict, and the two of them often fight in their scenes together where they're like, they just insult each other for an entire scene, and it's great and it's fun to watch. They don't do as much of this in Pride and Prejudice, but there are scenes where Elizabeth and Darcy just like kind of have like those conversations where you like say normal things to each other, but there's an underlying hostility. So there's just like, so I see that you're quite prideful. And he's like, and then back he's just like, well, you're a very stubborn person. I hope that clears up for you soon enough. And then they just go back and forth, and it's kind of funny. So in conclusion, Pride and Prejudice isn't necessarily one of those books that you would like take time out of your day to just read for no reason, unless you're like a person who really loves this book. But like, you could also read it outside of a school setting and it would be fine. Because even though it takes a lot of effort, once you get into the swing of the book, like once you start reading a couple pages at a time, you are able to like pick up on a lot of the words, and it's not super Shakespearean or old-timey language, so it's not super hard to understand. It's just usually the wording of things from the time period that makes it hard to understand. But if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice, or at least like watched the movie, please do. But if you watch the movie, I guarantee there'll be a lot less of the things that you will probably be looking for if you need to write an essay or something about it, so make sure you read the book if you need to do that. Thank you for watching. I'm probably going to come out with another video soon enough about Catcher in the Rye, because I remembered that I have that on my bookshelf, so I just have to refresh my memory on that, and then we'll be good to go. Thank you for watching, and subscribe to my channel. Make sure to like the video, and comment if you find something interesting or have a suggestion for me. Thanks. Stay safe. Bye.